everyone. I am Prayag, principal at Fireside Ventures, and today we have with us Shauravi, who is the co-founder of Slurrp Farm, and Sneh who's the co-founder of Baker's Dozen. Uh, as you all know, whose brand is it anyway? Is our attempt in having a candid conversation with entrepreneurs and decode what it really takes to build new age brands. For that, we have partnered with Your Stories, brand of New India, to reach out to as many entrepreneurs as we can and really share perspective on our learnings across the last several years, and also get the perspective of some experienced founders who we have with us today in sharing some of these learnings from their journey across various things. I think in the last several years, brands have been in the limelight and have really taken shape. And what we want to understand is the different facets of building out consumer brands. And today, in that process, we focus on the GTM strategy for brands, which is the go-to-market strategy, and how it is, interlinked with various different facets of brand building across different parameters like your pricing strategy, your target audience, your product strategy, and then we'll take it forward from there. Uh, Broadly, in terms of the flow, some of the key areas which we'll touch upon will be, what are some of the key considerations when you are planning for the GTM for any particular brand. Understand from Sneh and from Shauravi their journey of their businesses with respect to their own GTM strategies. Also, as Fireside, we share some of what has been some of our learnings from working with founders like yourselves over the last few years. Thereafter, we'll understand a bit in terms of what kind of an org structure do you really require, what kind of processes do you need to build in able to execute the strategy for which we have planned. And finally, we will also understand a bit in terms of what has been, has there been any change in the fundamental consumer behavior with new channels, upcoming channels like Q-commerce and all, which have come in, recently. So maybe, just to start off, would love to understand from both Shauravi and from Sneh, like what have been some of the key parameters they considered when they were planning for the GTM strategy for the respective brands, and how that has evolved over time, as the businesses have scaled. So maybe we'll start with Shauravi and thereafter move on to Sneh.
Hi, thank you, Prayag, and hi, Sneh. Nice to see you on this forum. Thanks for having us. It's always really nice to look back and reflect on the journey and hopefully save any new and budding entrepreneurs a lot of money from all the mistakes that we did make along the way, right? And there are some that are laughter-inducing and funny, and hope to share some of those along our conversation. Our GTM strategy has evolved a lot, and that's also because I would say the landscape has changed a lot. In that we launched towards the end of 2016, it was a very different market. D2C was kind of in its very early nascent stages. You had to code your own website in those days. And offline was the channel to try to build. And we have always been very clear that we want to play on the mass retail shelf. So that was the dream for us when we started the brand. But at the time, there was no GST. So you needed like a C form, which was to go from Delhi to Noida or Delhi to Gurgaon. You needed a form. You couldn't cross borders, right? So I'm just like taking you back to that stage to today, where distribution, everything is better aligned, and we can get into some of that. It's getting there. So I would say our strategy changed a lot over the years. We initially tried to build entirely in the offline channel. And but after a year of doing that, we met somebody who was like a retail sector expert, and he told me very seriously, like it was like an exam question. So what happens when a tree falls in a forest? So, wondering what does he want us to say? He's like, it's silent. Nobody hears. And he's like, you guys can go around running in the offline channel, but nobody knows who your brand is. There is zero marketing push behind this. So you're just pushing the product to what you said, Prayag, push versus sort of pull factors in establishing establishing yourself in the offline channel. So, we were taking a textbook case of here's how you build an offline business. But I think that the learning that has come over the last 5 years, and for many brands today, is the first port of call, is that you have to have enough, hundreds of thousands or million people to know who you are before you go and build out that segment. And so it really changed for us, where we decided to go digital first. And then we can talk a little bit more, and happy to answer, specific questions on. We have now gone back into the offline channel in a big way post the campaign with Anushka Sharma that Slurrp Farm did, and what have been some of our learnings, and how was that first time different to this time?
Thanks, Shauravi. Sneh, maybe good to hear, how what's your journey has been like.
Hey, thanks, Prayag, and hi, Shauravi. So actually, been quite a, I would say, almost a different journey from Shauravi's, and I think it'll be great for us to actually keep sharing notes. But I was reflecting, Prayag, on this, entire GTM strategy bit, right? And I think there are two fundamental ways, I think, and any entrepreneur can look at GTM. First, let's say you have a product, and then you go ahead and see that, okay, who's the target customer for this product and where are they buying it from, right? The other way is where an entrepreneur says that, okay, this is my target customer. It can be kids, it can be elderly patient, anybody, right? It's a segment that you have decided, and then you look at a product which that segment is buying and where are they buying from. But in both cases, if you'll notice, channel comes last, right? How you're selling, or actually where you're selling, comes after what you're selling and whom you're selling to.
Right.
Right. And most entrepreneurs, I think most of us who start off, right, we always start with a product in mind. So, we going back to now, the baker's dozen, and we are almost ancient now, right? We started in 2013. When online was not even big basket, right? It was online was like, you call your local guy and say, "Ye bhej do bhaiya," guys. Right? That was home delivery. So, when we look back, what we started off making artisan bread. Now, then we ask the question as to who's this customer, who's buying this, right? It's obviously a slightly upmarket, evolved household in a way. And where are they buying this from? So they are buying it from your neighborhood, kind of either a good bakery store or a modern trade store, like let's say a Nature's Basket or a similar example. And that's how for us it started. So, it was almost answering those questions which led us to be completely offline for a long time. Right. And I think we built the brand through those touch points. And just by being sure, available every time on that shelf repeatedly, right? And the online push for us came later, right? And now we are going to again go to the offline route, as we can talk later. So it's again going from offline to online, and now back, offline for us entirely. So I think that's been our journey at the Baker's Dozen.
And both of you, like, what have been some of the, let's say, your biggest learnings and your biggest challenges which you guys have faced, along the way over the last few years? Maybe.
Okay, so I'll go ahead.
No, go ahead. I mean, I think we've had very similar journeys. So I'm sure the learnings will be similar in terms of offline to online, and now looking at the offline channel again. I would say the biggest challenge when you're small is that old saying, right? Like, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is reality. Mm-hmm. And getting cash back in the offline channel when you're a small or new player is exceedingly difficult. Mm-hmm. And I think although people talk about the ease of marketing in the digital channel, what often doesn't get said is that the digital channel pays you.
Yeah.
And so, be it your own website or be it, online e-commerce marketplace sites. And that is actually due to a really interesting law called the MSME law, right? By which you have to pay an MSME company within 30 days. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying people wouldn't do it, but this ensures that it happens because you cannot be in default of this. There is no such law, or no one follows it in the offline channel. Mm-hmm. because often your counterparty is also an MSME.
Sure.
So they're saying, tough. So I think that actually was the biggest challenge for us. It would be really nice to be able to enforce some of it, but the reality is that in the offline channel, often you have given your product to someone, but it may not move.
Yeah.
So the ability to enforce the necessity to be paid back will take time. And it's only once your product takes hold and you get 2 or 3 cycles of your product being placed, cash coming back in the system, distributor getting it, store getting it, that you start to see cash come back to you.
Right.
So I would say that our biggest challenge in the early days was seeing yourself through that cycle. So while margins are better in the offline channel, ish, right?
Yeah.
It requires a lot more cash investment and the working capital cycle is longer.
Right.
So in the early stages, that can be to your detriment unless you are sitting on a lot of cash or you have a product which is, well, in my case, not necessarily very healthy and it's moving off the shelves really fast, right? So I think that overcoming that is what brand building is about.
Sure.
Yeah, so I completely agree with that. I think we've been through, we were bootstrapped for a long time, and your monthly working capital cycle becomes almost like your top priority on the calendar, right? I think that's most important. But what I would like to add, I think sometimes as entrepreneurs, we get into some vanity metrics from a distribution point of view, like let's say number of stores, or we talk number of cities, geographies. People start talking about, I'm in 30 cities, 1,000 stores, but is your product moving? Right? And what happens is then, you're happy for 3 months and then you're miserable for 9 months because when the product is coming back, right? Now, so personally, I think what worked for us in hindsight was that, when you're looking at a GTM strategy, pick one product range, pick one city, pick one channel also maybe initially, because when you're starting up, whether it is as an organization, or yourself as founders, you don't have the bandwidth or the resources to fight all of these, right? You can say that, my product is also available in Agartala and in, Kanyakumari and all, that's great to say, but does it move? And what is the kind of resources that you're putting behind it? So would it have been better if you were much more heavily entrenched in Mumbai or Delhi itself?
Right.
So I think that choice of prioritization, was a very key learning for us, because it's very easy to get swayed initially. If you're especially coming with a novel product, everyone will say, okay, I want to try. But, as Shauravi mentioned, then you're stuck with receivables. You're stuck with sometimes the product not moving because, it's a limited shelf, right? In the end, on the retail shelf. So I think those challenges need to be looked at.
Sure. No, absolutely.
You're also very lucky. You're in a category which is like doodh and roti, right? So you've got to have it every day, which is really nice. And
but it's also sorry, just to add, it gets spoiled and comes back also every day. So
fair. I know there are no silver bullets. Like for us in our category, it was that globally this is the case when you're trying to build a food brand for children. Kids don't want to eat the same thing every day. If I were trying to build a one product company, my own child would be like, please leave, right? Broadly, because I don't want to eat that same thing. So it was for us interesting, like the channel became clearer, and it definitely was to start in the online channel. But we could not be a one product and should not be a one product brand at all. And even one city actually with D2C and Amazon and Big Basket was not a necessity. So it's interesting, almost the experience played out differently, right? And perhaps that's also led by shelf life.
Yeah. Actually, just to add to that, right? That's the shelf life part. And I think a lot of the operational aspects, many of us ignore, but they actually decide our GTM strategy or strategy overall many times, right? As our shelf life has evolved, our distribution strategy has evolved.
Right.
And that's like almost a very boring thing to talk about, right? Shelf life, you talk about brand and you talk about messaging and positioning. And then actually the crux is that, shelf life decides how far you're going to go. right? So I think that was very critical for us also.
You could be like Asian Paints, that like, I won't give you my product if you don't pay me in 2 days. It's such a nice place to be.
Interesting. So some very interesting points there. And how do you guys look at, let's say, something like channel level profitability? In your case, maybe even city level profitability, because you are taking an approach of going city by city, whereas Shauravi is probably taking an approach of more going channel by channel. Are there some channels where you're looking to invest primarily for visibility, brand building, while leveraging others for profitability, scale? And again, in your case, at the city level, how do you look at multiple channels on a particular city and you are expanding city by city? So how do you guys think about that?
Okay, I'll go. So see, for us, Prayag, we realized very early on that it's a very, very availability-led industry or space that we are in, right? As Shauravi mentioned earlier, right? It is, we are like perishables, egg, milk, bread, these all go in that same basket. Now, if in a city, let's say, if I were to decide saying will only be available online or will only be available at a particular, let's say modern trade stores, that doesn't serve the purpose, because even if I take a locality, right? If you ask yourself today, let's say you're in a retail store, you will not decide to not buy bread from there because you want to buy it online later. Mm-hmm. If it's in front of you, you will buy it, right? It's not a very planned purchase, right? On the other hand, if you're at home, you're not going to go out to buy a loaf of bread or a cake or any bakery product, right? It's not going to be a visit only for that. Mm-hmm. So hence for us, the logical conclusion was that, we have to go deeper in a city and be completely omni-channel. So, even before the word became a kind of a buzzword, right? For us, it doesn't matter if the same housing complex gets served by that local store in the complex, it gets served by e-com partners, it gets served by a modern trade store nearby. We should be present across all of those. So for us, as you said, right, city level profitability overall matters, right? And can the city, justify the resources that we put into that? And the channel split might change depending on, where you are in terms of the evolution of the brand in that city, right? So there will be a difference in the channel split. Even we see that in Bombay versus a Bangalore versus a Delhi for us. Right. So I think that will change, but at a city level, does it make sense is what works for us.
Got it.
I mean, so definitely, how can we be profitable by channel is something we spend a lot of time thinking about. And there are it changes at different points in time. So we cannot and do not do a city level profitability cut. And in terms of, we break it down between, the marketplace channel, the Q-commerce channels, our D2C channel and offline channels. What are we doing in terms of what are the different components of profitability and margin, right? I think one thing that we have observed is at different points in time. So for example, during COVID, there was pretty high profitability in the online channel. Because CACs were lower, because it was a lot of young companies who understood the digital channel, putting money into ad spends. I think what has transpired perhaps in the online channel over time is two things. One is that a lot of the traditional players have upped their digital budget. So that has made CAC more expensive, along with all the, iOS, Apple changes on privacy, on being able to target your customer. But I would say equally, even on the marketplace front, what has happened, and this is, probably impacts Sneh and our brand more, because food sector brands have started being compared to personal care or fashion or clothing or brands which have far higher margin structures. And the marketplace, be it, one of the e-commerce marketplaces or even your website, is calibrating for that.
Right.
And I think that's an ecosystem change that we need to ask for, because it impacts all food companies which just have normal margin structures. And so there needs to be greater understanding as we see more food brands scale from being D2C and online to actually be, entities that are sustainable and going to make it, we're only going to be sustainable and make it if the channel profitability sharing between the different components of it becomes more equitable. And so in some ways, and to anybody who's a young food entrepreneur today, it is a little bit harder. I was trying to think about this, right? In that it is almost the ecosystem needs to evolve to make it possible for a new brand to come up today. Because the cost of entry is almost more painful than it used to be, say, even 2-3 years ago. And I think that's where we need change. And that then brands like us, which have reached that almost, we're very early in our journey still in some sense. If you count all of the marketing spend a company like ours has had, is probably, 3 TV ads for any brand. And so what does that transpire to? And as we begin that journey in the offline channel, then offline channel is different. You have huge, upfront payments in many cases. And then you got to work out, will that last over the journey that your brand makes in that channel? And so then the choice of stores becomes really important. And I completely agree with Sneh. All the vanity metrics of how many cities, how many stores, it's not as important as which store and where.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. Makes sense. And one of the biggest facets of actually executing the strategy is the org structure and the team which you actually build out to execute that strategy. So, would love to understand from you guys, what was your experience in trying to build out the teams required to execute the strategies which you laid out and the processes which you had to put in place as the business scaled, as the channel scaled. So, would love to hear your perspective on that.
In terms of how we thought about the org structure of building both for offline first and then online,
sure.
I would say we went out and initially, looked at all the FMCG companies and tried to replicate them, which was a really tremendously big error.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So we went and we tried to replicate the whole ASM sales structure. We had lots of promoters. We first had them on our roles, then we learned how they are not on your roles. All that learning curve happened. And I think that we realized that so many people and fleet on the street is something that is very challenging for a young brand to deal with on day one.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other key learning is that you will see a lot of FMCG entrepreneurs are not necessarily people who've done sales in a retail company before.
Mm-hmm.
So, understanding the leadership skills to manage a massive team like that, even though you may not manage it directly and you may hire, best of best ASM from any awesome company, I think that has its own time curve. And I would say we learned a lot by doing that. And we did that in 3 cities, in Bangalore, Bombay, and Delhi. Then we set about trying to build the offline team. Online team, sorry. When we built the online team, building that team was a whole different journey in some way.
Sure.
And that journey was, I would say, learning. And in some ways, we grew up in the era of Shopify. Yeah. So we didn't have to build a big tech team. I think a lot of people went through that. So I would say it's very much easier and lean and simpler to build. And I would say 2.0 for any entrepreneurs who want to start today, you do not need a massive sales team to start. You need to figure out in each city, what are your top stores? Like, Sneh, you were saying earlier, you got to figure where exactly is my customer and where should I meet them and work that through. And that should really sync with your digital online strategy in some ways, right? Be it your ads targeting or be it the way that you are reaching out to your consumer. It can be that. And it can be that for tier 1 or tier 2 or any city that you choose to go after. I don't know if that entirely answers your question.
No, sure. I think that's very helpful. I think helps get a perspective in terms of how you are looking to build out the teams at different points in time as your strategy evolved, in the journey of building out the brand. And Sneh, in your case, you have a very interesting model where, you have a dark store model, which is quite unique in this particular, in the D2C brand space. And you have the pure marketplace model along with the offline channel. So how did you go about building out the teams for these different businesses? Some of it is, I know, still work in progress, but how are you thinking through it, as you scale each of these different channels?
So I think, Prayag, the answer for us now, when I look back, right, it's different when you're looking at, let's say, the managerial layer versus when you're looking at the end,
Sure.
salesperson. Uh, I think one of the mistakes we did initially, which we thankfully corrected quickly, was we tried to hire specialists at the start, right? Now, what happens is when you're a small brand, and let's say you hire a modern trade specialist, or you hire a distribution or a general trade specialist.
Mhm.
Now the problem is you have hired a person who wants a very big canvas to play on,
Mhm.
right? But your canvas itself is very small,
Sure.
right? And in that you're cutting a small pie and giving it to him or
Mhm.
her, right? Now what happens is then there's an expectation mismatch, there's a capability mismatch, and you'll end up losing 1 or 2 years, while that person, eventually either gets frustrated, or get frustrated because they can't come down to the level of a startup.
Sure. Sure.
Right. So then what we did was we hired more like generalists, did a lot of training. So, you mentioned about our dark store model, right? I'll tell you, the person who's open. So in peak lockdown, pre-lockdown, pre-COVID, we were 3 stores,
Mhm.
right? By the time the second wave got over, we were 43 stores.
Okay.
Uh, Now, that person who was finding these dark stores in the midst of a nationwide lockdown was our head of modern trade earlier.
Mhm.
Right now, but see, because he had been kind of trained in the organization, and so it was almost like whatever work is given to you, I will do it to the best of my ability.
Sure.
Uh,
Sure.
so, but if I had like a, let's say, an FMCG background head of trade, he would have said, "This is not my work, right? Or I don't know how to do this. I need a team for this." And here my guy was actually going on the roads and trying to see which store is shutting down. Can we go and talk to the landlord and saying, we'll just take it, right? And that understanding that initially get people who are more, I wouldn't even say, jack of all trades, but a person who's comfortable with doing everything,
Mhm.
train them. And now, see, today when we are looking to scale, and Prayag, you're aware of how we are trying to now build the team, right? And now we are saying, okay, can we look at specialists now? Because now we, as a brand, as an organization, have the resources or backing in terms of giving that person a good enough plate to kind of play with, right? Uh, that has to happen at a certain level. Don't do that too early,
Got it.
because then it becomes counterproductive, I would say.
Makes sense.
I want to tell you something that is actually this a really nice way to articulate the single biggest learning for
Mhm.
anyone who wants to start,
Mhm.
because you want to mimic that traditional FMCG company,
Yeah.
so you go hire the specialist. It often also leads to incorrect decisions
Mhm.
because that person has handled a 5 or 10 rupee product, wants a certain kind of brand, a certain kind of look, and you start altering the decisions that you make basis the recommendations of someone who's gone and scaled a 500 crore brand, right? And that is not applicable to you at your stage. And Sneh, that's like a really useful point that you mentioned, because I would say that is a mistake most brands who've tried to win in the offline channel make. And actually, the best person to ask is Prayag, right? Like,
Sure.
what have you seen that has worked or not worked? I know you're like, I think it's really nice because you guys are you let brands make their mistakes. But it'd be nice to also see from your end what has worked, what hasn't worked in a distribution strategy.
Sure, sure. So, I mean, of course, you guys have been the guys on the ground, and, our view is more outside in. But typically, some of our biggest learnings, at least having seen brands at different level of scale, and as they have scaled, looking outside into the journey, I think one of the biggest learnings was there were some brands which tried offline very early, but figured that, okay, maybe it's too early in the day for them to be able to penetrate that channel and go up against the incumbents in a channel where they have a inherent advantage. The incumbents have a clear advantage in terms of the offline distribution channel. So what I think a lot of our brands have figured out, it's that the online channels are much better for building out the overall brand equity and telling the narrative. What does the brand stand for? What is the overall brand thought? What is the consumer pain point they are solving for, and how they are solving for that? I think online channels are far more democratic in the sense that I think you have a even level playing field with the large incumbents there. And once that brand equity is built out, like whether it's across, it would be across multiple channels, it's your own website, different kind of marketplace channels where you scale up and where you are telling the consumer the story on a consistent basis. Then when you go offline and you can leverage that channel for scale, because majority of the Indian market is still shopping offline as on today, and it's true for the Western markets also, right? But I think a lot of times, we find founders are looking to answer the question, when should I go offline? And at least our learning there has been that you should be going, I think it's hard to put a number to it, but you should be going offline when there is a consumer pull for your products, as against you trying to push the products to your distributors and retailers. Now, at what point in time in the journey does the brand equity become strong enough to do that? That's a qualitative call. There are different agencies who do brand studies and all, and one can get some sense from doing some of those exercises. But I think that's the time when you really go offline, because once you have built the brand equity, the consumer knows you, and then you're also able to negotiate better commercials with the offline partners, because there is a consumer pull, from the channel itself. I think beyond that also, I think in some categories, unfortunately, you may not have a choice but to go offline very early. If it's a very, let's say, theoretically, if it's a very low AOV category, those are not very easy to scale up online, because it's a basket filler and it's not what builds the core of the basket. In some of those categories, unfortunately, you are forced to go offline very early. So that comes with its own challenges, but unfortunately, some of those categories may not be e-commerceable or D2Cable at a very early stage in their journey. So I think on the channel piece, what we have also figured is that, you can't look at GTM in isolation. It has to be linked in sync with your product strategy. With, I think, Sneh and Shauravi, both of you touched on that, where is your consumer shopping? Firstly, identifying who is your consumer, where are they shopping, and where they are shopping in a way aligns with your pricing strategy. What kind of pricing strategy are you playing? And it's important to be at the consumer touch point, to know first who your consumer is and consumer touch point. So I think your GTM has to be in sync with that. If you feel that your consumer is slightly more premium consumer, which you may find in the modern trades or the premium GTs or some select e-commerce channels or the website, then that's the channel to go after. Eventually, if, let's say, you do decide to go to the mass general trade, you may need to think through your product strategy in terms of your SKU mix, in terms of your sizes. You may need to get into sachets and all, so that I think that thought process has to be there. So I think all of this has to come together at a holistic level across these different areas. And again, like I think Shauravi mentioned about celebrity endorsement. So now when you start doing that, the call then is strategically, do you want to be at more point of sale so that you don't lose that consumer? The reach is not a challenge. So those are some of the most strategic calls which one would need to take, So yeah, these have been some of the big learnings in our this thing. And I think the key takeaway is that if you can build a brand initially online, build the brand equity online, build the brand capital in the consumer's mind online, and eventually leverage it offline to really hyperscale, I think that could be some kind of a playbook which we have seen work in the past with some of our larger brands.
And in those cases, Prayag, how did you see the teams evolve, the actual organizations for these brands as they scaled?
So again, I think there one of our learning looking into those businesses has been that businesses which invested in teams ahead of scale more often than not scale much faster than businesses which invested in team later and waited for the scale. And then I think so businesses which got on board the key revenue drivers early. So I think so like I was saying, I think businesses which built out the teams early and which allowed those revenue drivers to build out their own teams below them were the ones which actually scaled faster. And on the flip side, we have also seen businesses which build very strong brands but didn't build strong teams, and then thereafter found it tough to scale. So we have seen both sides of the story. So I think it's very important, in our view at least, to invest in teams early and ideally invest in teams before the growth actually comes. to help growth, I mean, to actually help catapult the business when you get to that inflection point,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know, Prayag, you have a very big sweet tooth, right? So that's why you're on this call with Sneh and me. And but apart from sweet tooth, what's your sweet spot, right? Like, do you look for businesses which are low average order value, middle, high? If someone were to say, like, where should I be thinking of in terms of pricing my product, but equally, should I be playing in a prestige or mass sort of segment? I know there's no one size fits all,
Sure.
but for a brand, and you're especially looking for brands that can scale, what sort of lens do you take apart from personal food eating preference?
Sure.
What is the investor lens?
Sure. So I mean, from an investor's perspective, I think the two big parameters which you look at, irrespective of the stage of business, the first thing is always the founding team. Like, I think we invest in you guys, and you guys are the most important things which we invest in, even beyond the business model and all. So I think the conviction in the founding team, that's probably the first thing we look for when we invest in any business. We would rather invest in a business where we really like the founding team, where we are still not fully convinced on the business model, than invest in a business model we are fully convinced on but not convinced on the founding team. So I think that's the way we would look at it. So after the founding team, the next big parameters would be the space, like the space in which we are playing. And that has to be large enough for you to build a sizable business. So I think the founding team and the space, and when I say the space, I'm talking also about the consumer insight which the founder has, the pain point they are trying to address, and how they are trying to address. And that's the important thing. I think from there, everything else flows from that. So I mean, a lot of businesses, when we would be coming in, see, I think it's a startup, right? I mean, it's a journey where you explore and you figure out a lot of things together. Your product strategy, the pricing strategy, the GTM strategy, I think all of that is always a work in progress which can evolve over time. But if I were to say, the two big things would be the founders and the consumer insight, and basis that insight, the size of the problem they are solving for. So yeah. So so maybe, I think one more question which I had for you guys, was like, nowadays we are seeing a lot of these new age channels coming up, like the Q-commerce channels. Multiple guys have come up in that space, and since you guys are so close to the market, have you seen any fundamental change in consumer behavior in terms of their purchasing habits, or any fundamental change in terms of how they are building the baskets, and with these news channels coming in? And also, as businesses, how have you evolved to cater to some of these channels and leverage some of these channels? So yeah, maybe Shauravi, maybe you can go first.
So happy to. I thought Sneh might have more to say here. That's why I was waiting for him to say. I actually, in my own head, I was laughing because they've really solved a problem in that very often, this is the joke around modern parenting and for Slurrp Farm as a children's brand, which is sometimes you remember your child has to eat just when they're like screaming of hunger. So from that point of view, I think that quick commerce has definitely helped brands like us. And I would say, I wouldn't say it's a challenge it's a channel that has massively like overnight scaled, but it's definitely become a reckoner in how we reach our consumer. And obviously it suits certain kind of food products more, right? Ones that you can consume immediately. But it also really, really works for our end consumer, which is the modern parent who may not have planned their day to the best, and thought, I'm going to sort out my child's food 1 week in advance. And we've all become right here, right now. So it definitely addresses a consumer need gap. And we definitely see the channel growing.
Sure. And Sneh, especially in your case, because I think you have some products which are very amenable to the impulse category, So I think Shauravi made the point about people ordering on the fly. So yeah. How has this channel panned out for you, and how are you seeing this channel grow, and also the consumer behavior, pattern?
See, for us, obviously quick commerce has actually been a significant growth driver, especially over the last 1 year. And I think what has worked is See, we were again, always a daily neighborhood need, right? I think what quick commerce is replacing or substituting is that local shop whom you call and say at night, 8 o'clock saying, "Bhaiya, 10 minute mein kuch bhej do." Yeah, half an hour. That and there, that's where, for example, daily need product like ours, or an on-the-go impulse consumption product, like let's say a cake or a cookie pack, right? Now, these work perfectly in that model. Having said that, I think two things one should be aware of is that, see, quick commerce is not according to me, a discovery platform.
Yeah.
It's not a place where a brand can get built. Okay.
Yeah.
If you have ever on a quick commerce app, you're going to type the particular thing that you need, find that, order it, and get out of the app. Because if you need that in 10 minutes, you're not going to spend more than 30 seconds on the app. Right. So when, if you're trying to build a brand only on quick commerce, that's not going to work, according to me. It's a place where it becomes your top-up purchase, right? Or, that last minute, need that Shauravi was mentioning that a parent has forgotten, right? That's where quick commerce works very well. And I think the second thing is, and I'm just going back, Prayag, to one of the things you mentioned, that when you look at different channels, right, the product range also evolves.
Yeah.
I think one of the mistakes that many of us do is, we take one product and can we put this across channels, right? Where, for example, in quick commerce, now can we look at more on the go consumption, smaller pack sizes, top ups, right? Your range on a big basket can be very different from what it is on Instamart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, because one is a very, very planned grocery purchase where and if you like really, if you look at it, more people would use big basket on a laptop or making a monthly grocery list versus an Instamart, which is that last minute purchase.
Yeah.
Right. So as an entrepreneur, if we can look at the same product, it can just be pack size variations, right? But that's very critical to understand what the customer is looking at in that channel.
And
I will say one thing, sorry, Sneh and Prayag, to cut you off, but quick commerce may not be the channel to build a brand, but it is a very nice channel to sample a brand. In that, when you get a big basket, and I don't mean the company big basket, but when you get a big basket of groceries, if you get a free sample, it's like going to get lost somewhere. You don't even know, and God knows it'll go somewhere in some shelf. But the nice thing about like quick commerce is that there's, you may have ordered 3-4 things, and that sample is really going to stand out. You're also possibly at a more open moment. Now you ordered something like you want to eat or snack or quickly eat, and then something else comes with it. So I think that it is therefore not necessarily a bad channel to build a brand in that way. Maybe not in the purchase way, but it's a nice way to stand out, I think.
Sure. No, absolutely. I think it's always been more of a transaction channel as compared to a discovery channel per se. And but have you guys seen like any of the, let's say, consumer planned purchases because of Q-commerce now moving to more of an impulse purchase bucket? Like, has that transition happened in some product categories? Something you guys have observed? In a way, consumer has got spoiled for choices, right? So
in our experience, right, if I were to just like look at our own sales, I don't think, Prayag, a big basket or a nature's basket planned purchase has moved to an Instamart or a Blinkit. I think almost, in a very new age way, I think quick commerce is almost becoming like the new GT for us. Right. It is, because we can't reach those corner stores, right? Because that has its own distribution headaches. Right. So quick commerce kind of enables you to reach all those cities, all those pin codes, while not having the hassles of collections and your own logistics and all of that. Right. So I think that's where the switch is happening. It's not from per se a planned purchase to, that now suddenly I will not plan for anything and I will just buy everything on the fly.
Got it. Makes sense. Sure. So
we're not seeing it replace like the grocery basket.
Got it. Makes sense. So great, yeah, guys. This was great. So thanks a lot for to both Shauravi and Sneh for coming in. And I think this was, I'm sure, a lot of very interesting learnings from what you guys have shared. We'd also like to thank the Your Story Brands of India team and the Fireside Ignite team for helping organize this. And we'll be back very soon with another session of Whose Brand Is It Anyway? So thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Prayag.
Thank you.
Sneh.
Thanks, Prayag. Thank you, Shauravi.